GLocal session, Gender Inclusion in Climate Evaluation. This is the GLocal session brought to you by the Green Climate Fund's Independent Evaluation Unit, GCF IEU. We are very happy that you've joined us for this exciting session that would look at gender inclusion, what it means to mainstream gender considerations in climate projects and in climate evaluation. All right, it is 9:01 KST. We can wait a few more seconds for other colleagues to join us. All right, we are ready to get started. So once again, welcome to the session, Gender Inclusion in Climate Evaluation. My name is Yeonji Kim. I am Evaluation Uptake Specialist here at GCF IEU. And I will be moderating today's session. Here is the program for today. I am also one of the presenters, so I would like to speak briefly about some of the reflections that I had on gender and women's empowerment based on the two recent evaluation case study visits that I had. And we will have Susumu Yoshida, my IEU colleague, tell us about some of the findings on gender outcomes from the impact evaluations of GCF projects that he has completed here at the IEU. We also have two panelists joining us today, my esteemed colleagues from GCF. So first, Ms. Seblewongel, Negussie, who is a gender and social specialist here at the GCF. And she would tell us about her experience of mainstreaming gender across GCF programming and operations. We also have with us Mr. Rajib Ghosal, the Global Head of Climate, Portfolio and Quality at Save the Children International. And Rajib also worked at the GCF, and he contributed to the gender-related work of the GCF in those crucial initial years as well. So after we do the two quick presentations and the panel discussion, we, of course, want to hear from you, and I'm going to open the floor so that you could raise your questions and share with us your thoughts with the speakers directly. All right, with that, I can start my presentation. During the presentation, of course, during the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat so that we can come to your questions at the end. All right. All right, so this is my presentation. I had two evaluation case study visits last year, first to Tajikistan and then to the Marshall Islands. And the case study visits and the case studies themselves, these had to inform the larger GCF, the evaluation that was assessing the results of the GCF's health, food, and water security investments in developing countries. So while you can read all about the hard evidence that we found about this topic from this evaluation report, in today's session, I'm going to more focus on the deeper gender and women's empowerment related lessons that stood out for me during my case study visits. So I want to do it in a more storytelling manner, sharing with you some of the women's water and food security stories from the ground. Okay, so let's first take a look at the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands, it really surprised me when I got there. So it really dawned on me that as an evaluator and as program officers for some of us, we really need to go and see the complexities that's involved, how unique the country's circumstances are when it comes to climate programming. So RMI is one of the world's smallest, most isolated and low-lying atoll nations that's in the Central Pacific, roughly halfway between Hawaii and Australia. You see the little white dots that are kind of donut-shaped in the map on the top. And so those are the 29 atolls and islets that together make up the Marshall Islands. So they are vastly separated from each other. So it's even difficult to go from one atoll to the other. So that's a challenge. And if you were to combine all these little white dots together to get the total land area of the Marshall Islands, it's roughly about 70 square miles only. That's the size of Washington, D.C. And these 29 atolls and islands of the RMI, they are highly vulnerable to climate change. And due to the rising sea levels, the land area is getting submerged, and it also means saltwater intrusion. So it all adds to a lot of complexities. So they don't have a lot of water that's usable and drinkable for the population. What's making the cases more complicated is the very sad history of the nuclear testing legacies in the RMI during the war times. So due to the nuclear tests done on these waters, it was contaminated, and people of the Marshall Islands have been relocating as their areas were heavily affected. In this delicate situation, the women in RMI, they want to position themselves as environmental stewards in the country and the caretakers of the nature and of their environment. There is a local women's association that's quite influential, and that's called the Women United Together Marshall Islands, WUTMI. And they have local chapters for other atolls, and they really want to promote the idea that, yes, women should be the environmental stewards in the country. So what really struck me about the RMI is that it has been traditionally matrilineal. So as a matrilineal society, the land rights and the custody of the land, it gets passed down through the mother's lineage. And even the name of the clans, it's the mother's name. So you might think, oh, so women in the Marshall Islands, they must be quite influential and they are calling the shots. But it's not so. It's quite the contrary. The women's influence over land and decision-making has weakened due to urbanization, modernization, among other things. And very sadly, there is a rise on the number of gender-based violence cases in the country. And this gender-based violence is worsened by climate change and the lack of water that's usable for the people, which reduces the chances of people having good hygiene and good health and so on. So very sadly, let's say the husband could complain to the wife, oh, you smell, and then it also adds to the dispute, or the it shouldn't be allowed, but the violence cases. And so there are many cases of this domestic violence, gender-based violence that's aggravated by climate change, but women rarely report these cases to authorities. So there's still a lot that needs to be done. And let's say some women were successful in kind of escaping from the place of violence, which is their homes, unfortunately. Then even if they did so, these vulnerable people that escaped from the place of violence, they need continued support, tailored support systems throughout. And so the RMI, as a small island developing state, it also has challenges when it comes to even getting an international expert coming to the country and helping with them, providing training and capacity strengthening support. So this is something that we need to think about. And the women's voice in these local contexts, that needs to be better incorporated into project designs and implementation plans. Now let's go quickly over to Tajikistan, now in Central Asia. So in this picture on the left, that's the first picture that I took together with me, my two other female evaluators. We were there in the country together. And we were deep into a conversation, and you see the three gentlemen from the community, the rural village that we visited. They came out to speak with us and tell us about what kind of transformations that the GCF water food security projects have brought to their lives. But then when I kind of raised my hand and then saw what was happening, like I had to kind of take a step back, and I then spotted these three ladies from the community, from the same community, who had been standing there all alone, but they didn't join this bigger circle with the male beneficiaries. And so none of us were really capturing the voice of these women. So then once I realized it, I had to walk over there and talk to them, make a little bit more extra effort to get their stories. So this is what they shared with me. Another fact to remember is that many of the households in some of these rural communities, they are female-led households. And I wondered why so many households? And the reason is because their husbands have traveled to neighboring countries like Russia in search of seasonal labor or construction jobs. And for Tajikistan, the money that people make overseas and send back to their countries, remittances, they take up a very high portion of the nation's GDP. So the husbands are gone, they are not home for 6 months or longer. They are rarely home. And so naturally, women are, serving as the head of the household a lot of the times. And when it comes to water, for instance, women have had the traditional role of going, finding some water and fetching water from the source and then bringing it back to their homes and kind of trying to manage the use of insufficient water somehow. So I asked them, so what's different now that the GCF invested in, climate resilient farming and also water access, improvement? So the first thing they shared with me was no more back pain, no more joint pain, because I don't need to walk hours at end just to go find some water that's usable and then trying to bring it back home. The only means of transport that they have is just simply to walk or use their donkey if they have one. And so their physical and mental health have improved significantly because now they can just, have water from their homes. And this has translated into women having more time for other activities that they want to do, such as, helping children with homework and attending to other types of chores at house. And the improved food security and the food surplus that they are enjoying as a result of the project assets, such as a greenhouse installed in each household and a solar-powered food dryer that's available now as a result of GCF investments, they do have more variety of food available and food surplus throughout the year. And in some cases, this has translated into a bit more income. And so they are now investing in, children's school supplies and school uniforms, which makes the women really happy. Now, these are all great stories from the women, but the increased food security has not translated into any meaningful income generation nor market creation in these rural communities. And I know there are many reasons for this, right? The remoteness of these rural communities to begin with, they don't get to enjoy the kind of infrastructure that cities have. And for women in particular, mobility and the means of transport were quite limited in these community settings. And even if they have a little bit of food extra, given the larger family sizes, it just goes to feed their own children or other family members. So in this context, yes, the GCF investments have provided more access to food and better access to clean water. And, we probably took care of, no poverty, the SDG goals and everything. But we need to move from these human rights-based project benefits to more to the different phases of empowerment. So for me, empowerment could mean a lot of different things, but they could include strengthened capacity and life skills, income generation, and more to financial independence, the ability to think for oneself and make decisions about oneself, about one's mobility, for instance. If I want to go somewhere, I can go, that kind of thing, and having more access to opportunities and sometimes better opportunities. For me, these are empowerment, and we should aim to get to these phases of empowerment. With that, I'm going to leave you with these 3 discussion questions. How can GCF better capture these wide range of project benefits, including gender and empowerment benefits? So we need to go beyond the number of male and female beneficiaries. And 2, how can women's empowerment considerations for a specific country, cultural context be better built into project designs and implementation plans? And thirdly, Is there a way to measure empowerment more meaningfully? And what tools and metrics are currently available for this? And I'm hopeful that the next presenter and the panelists could address these questions, given their expertise. So you can tune in for that. Without further ado, I'm going to now hand it over to Susumu, who's ready to tell us about the impact evaluation's outcomes. So Susumu, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Yeonji. I'm Susumu Yoshida. I'm an evaluation specialist at the Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund. So my work is around this LOTA program at the IEU. Can you go to the next slide? And today I'm going to share some of the findings. The title says findings, but today I'm not going to talk too much about findings, but rather reflections, and then based on my experience, so that we can stimulate the discussion and what we should be doing and how we should go about to measure the gender impact. So the LOTA program, LOTA is the learning-oriented real-time impact assessment program. So basically what we do is impact evaluation or impact assessment of the GCF projects. How do we measure impact? So we use different kinds of data, including administrative data and then the satellite data, remote sensing, but still we heavily rely on the household survey, right? Yeah, so can you go to the next slide? And to measure gender-specific impact, for me, conceptually, two different approach is going to be needed. The first one is collecting gender disaggregated data. That's the number of female beneficiaries or number of like male beneficiaries. So it's how many we have those, right? I think we are doing much better job in this aspect. All of I think the funding proposal and then the monitoring framework at the GCF, we request to disaggregate data, and then the project team have to report based on the gender in terms of the progress, right? However, collecting gender sensitive information, that's not as simple as we wish. I think most of you have similar experience because there are many issues around there, right? So when we measure about the decision-making power, how the GCF investment change or empower the beneficiaries or the women, or how they are changing the time allocation because of the project, or even perception, it's not as simple as what we think. So we can maybe discuss more. But especially like gender-based violence, I think it's a very different level to measure correctly, accurately measure, and then do some estimation. Can you go to the next slide? So here I'm showing some of the findings from our completed evaluations. Let me start with the one on the right, Malawi. So the GCF investment, the beneficiary 14 to 17 percentage point more using the climate information to make what kind of crops they're going to grow. So, but this finding is not really a gender specific findings. It's a overall, right? So it's not gender analysis there. Yeah, in the middle, like in Madagascar, the women-headed household, they adapt more some of the climate smart practices, such as the soil conservations or the terracing. So that's the gender specific findings, but without the estimation, the percentage point right here. So, but we are saying that the gender, the female, adopt more of these practice, which is the positive impact of the project. The one on the left, in Bangladesh, that's another project. So the beneficiaries, the female beneficiaries, because of the project, they engaged at least one income generating activities, and then the increase by 8.3 percentage point. So that's, I think, what we are trying to do for more of the project, showing specific impact on the more rigorous way to show how the project is really benefiting and then improving the welfare of the not only beneficiary as a whole, but the female, which is more vulnerable to the climate change. So these are some of the findings that I wanted to show today. But can you go to the next slide? This is a blog post by the World Bank. I happened to read this post a few weeks ago, actually. So, and it has quite interesting discussions and some insights I wanted to share. I thought, oh, this is very timely since I was preparing for this talk. So basically, in this blog post, they were introducing a working paper by Amaral and others about measuring the gender-based violence, which I raised. It's very complicated, right? And then one of the things that it's quite, in my opinion, interesting is how they did differently to measure gender-based violence. In this specific context, it's the project is aiming to reduce the school-based violence, the gender-based violence at school. But not only that, it tried to encourage students to recognize the violence and also report the violence. And what they did was not just rely on self-reported measures, because it's always difficult to report. It's a shame to report if there's a victims. So what they did is, in addition to self-report measures, they asked third parties. For example, in the classroom, have you witnessed somebody in your classroom who experienced such a violence? So to see, because it's relatively easier to report and share, and to see the how much they are, like the consistent, or it's more it's people are not reporting. So I found very interesting the approach, and then these things we can also try to adapt for our evaluation, and then we can go about it. Next slide. Yes. So, and then I wanted to summarize a little bit and then lead to the next discussion in this with the panelists. The first thing is, of course, it's a very sensitive, especially the gender based violence, and also or even the empowerment part. When I work with the project team and then the donors, international organizations, often they really want to see how it's empowering the women and how it's changing again, gender, reducing the gender-based violence. Although the intervention itself is not directly to addressing these aspects, right? So I think, in my opinion, it's a wish list to some extent, because it's fine to measure, but it comes with effort and cost, which is it's the next point. To measure not only gender-based violence, but the gender-specific outcomes, it requires more resource and more planning and then the preparations, right? So for example, we do a lot of household surveys. We go to the very remote areas. Then if we have like the gender empowerment module or the set of questions, then the interviewer should be also female, not the male, in order for them to answer easily, right? So then it doubles the costs because the firm or the data collection firm, they have to have a pair of at least one male, one female, in order to only collect that module. So that's the costs. And then the third point, it's saying to do that, then these people have to be, enumerators have to be trained and on the these specific topics, and the way how we ask and is very important, and it makes a big difference, right? As you can imagine. When we go to this context, we not only ask gender specific outcome, but all the others different modules. So suddenly, let's say, for example, okay, now we're going to ask about gender empowerment. Even we don't say gender empowerment, then we ask the male head of household, can we ask your spouse? And we want to ask her separately. And then they say, okay, why? Why? No, she cannot do that. Or like, oh, why you have to take her to the other place? So that's the kind of things that we always experience when we go to the field. So I think these are the consideration that we have to have when we want to measure the gender specific impact. And lastly, it's a cultural and the social norms. This is the experience that I had actually in the field. So sometimes it seems there's a gap between the gender specialist at the international organization or like headquarter level and on what we want to measure, what we have to do to comply with the policies and the requirement of the our project on the ground. So yes, ideally at the international standard, that's what we have to do, let's say, what we have to collect. But we go to the field in realities because of the social norms, cultural issues. It's not always, it's very easy to do. So to some extent, it has to come together, but there's sometimes a tension between the specialists and the project people, project teams who are implementing project on the ground. So I wanted to hear from the other panelists today, what can we do about this and how much we should be doing so that it can come together? Because yes, collecting these data is very important, and we have to have some policy implications, and we have to work towards to improve these people. But what is the balance of these two? So maybe I should stop here and go to the next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susumu, for leaving us with that, food for thought. And so I think I can go straight to Seble now. So we are starting our panel discussion. So Seble, Susumu already raised a very good question. What can we do given the very different and varying international and local contexts? And I know, our ideals sometimes as an international organization could be very, very far from how things are at the baseline. So yeah, what do you say about this?
Okay, thank you, Yeonji and Susumu, for that presentation. Very interesting findings, but not far from what we already work on. Yeah, to the question about the international meeting being based on reality on the ground. So in principle, we at the office do not drive the agenda on the ground. The projects are country-owned. The requirements, though, are very clear. Like we would want whatever work that has to be done is to be based on realities on the ground, and therefore that's why we ask for gender assessments to be done, gender analysis to be done, which is context specific and based on the lived experiences of the people. We also give guidance that it should involve the people that are going to be benefiting from the program or are going to be engaged in the program, so they have a say as to what is it that they want to see, what kinds of activities they want to be included. Take note of the local context. You were talking about the social, cultural settings. So when the gender assessment is being done, the expectation and the understanding and the guidance that we give is that it should be based on local realities. So in principle, what we see at our table when it comes through the funding proposal is what communities would have seen, communities would have agreed, including women who are going to be part of that. Because on the gender side of things, we emphasize this about the relationship between men and women and the different parts of the community. So we expect that package, when it comes to us, would have consulted with the communities, with the relevant stakeholders, not just communities, but, you know, offices, whatever, whoever is going to be involved in the delivery of that program or project, to be involved in the design. So our principle is all based on participatory approaches to doing the design, and therefore we assume when they bring it to us, it's based on understanding. I don't think on the gender side of it, we prescribe this is what you should measure, but we do have as GCF the log frame that needs to be filled in, and there is a results chain that they will have to do. And so we try to move away only on reporting on the disaggregated data and try to capture the kinds of things that you were talking about earlier. Behavior change, social change, empowerment, and things like that. So in as much as those elements have been coming through the assessment, that's what we encourage the AEs to reflect in the gender action plan that they develop. So we try to balance what we see with what could show the real changes that they want to see without taking away the realities on the ground. So in my understanding, that's what we are trying to do. But we are happy to see if what is being required from the GCF is far from what can be delivered. I think one of the things that we are, the repeated comments that we get is that it's usually that we focus on trainings, and the action plans focus on trainings and counting the number of people that have been engaged in trainings or having access to that. But what is that a reflection of is something that we have to think about. I mean, data is important. We want disaggregated data, but what is more important is the analysis of that data to tell us, okay, have we reached our objectives and how can we reach and what should we be doing? The other thing that I would like to add is the gender action plan, in essence, is a living document, in our opinion, because we give the AEs and our partners the opportunity to update it as they go along, because they are working on social issues that can change as interventions happen. So they can adjust it without losing sight of the ultimate impacts they want to make. I'll leave it at that and see if there are more questions or many other ways to deal with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Seble. Are there any kind of newer trends that you are seeing from the GCF funding proposals, the project proposals that are coming in now versus several years ago? And if you have seen any changes or, I don't know, some encouraging news or updates from your line of work? Mm-hmm.
There are differences in the kinds of funding proposals and also the gender assessments and action plans. And when the quality of the assessment is better, the kinds of actions you would expect would be better. Mm-hmm. I do see that, you know, people, the proponents, the AEs are going beyond counting numbers and try to look at other elements, you know. Maybe it's not transformational, but it is responsive. They are trying to address elements of skills development, if you like, or encouraging women to go into male-dominated fields, but also recognizing that certain interventions could be harmful in a sense. It could instigate violence within the homes and all that. So they will have to identify those risks and start to engage in mitigants so that it doesn't happen. So there is the risk aversion or the risk mitigation plus, but the do-good element as well, investing in women's already existing skills, making sure that men and women are in conversations as they try to move forward and things like that. So you do see, but it all depends on which countries are proposing, and it also is a reflection of how advanced countries are in terms of addressing gender issues in countries. But there are some interesting ones where they are, like, you know, you talked about Madagascar using local women's associations, and I think that's the kind of thing that we should be encouraging, using local systems and local institutions, because they would know the cultural nuances, the cultural sensitivities, and they will be able to find sustainable solutions rather than a project going in and trying to fix 1, 2, 3 things. So the use of local knowledgeable institutions, I think those approaches are going in. But I think all in all, as Rajib was saying, as we were discussing, the fulfilling the requirements, okay, to think that, okay, we need to understand what is going on, and then based on that finding, we have to design interventions that address needs and priorities, I think is one of the good things that we are doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Seble. We will come back to you, of course, but maybe let's invite Rajib. So Rajib, you have very relevant experience. So now working as, Save the Children International, but you have had many years of experience at GCF, I believe, as a gender and social specialist. So tell us about your views on some of these matters that we've been talking about. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Please do come in. Rajib, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. And indeed, it's a pleasure and privilege to be here. And in fact, an honor as well. Brings back a lot of fond memories of GCF, working with Seble and others on different things, including gender, and then looking at working on the integrated results management framework, and coordinating GCF's first change management exercise, which happened in 2017. So yes, so it feels very, if you like, nostalgic. Like I mentioned, as we were discussing before this call, what I will do is I'll just touch upon the top level things we did and why we did it, in terms of trying to mainstream gender in not only policy prescriptions per se, for example, the first gender policy and then the updated gender policy and action plan, which was taken forward by Seble and others in the sustainability and inclusion unit, but also the journey where we went through as to why we wanted to see gender being mainstream more strongly in the life cycle of projects and programs at GCF. Now, when the first set of proposals, funding proposals, came out in 2015, there were 5 of them. And what we saw at that time, and in fact, at that time, there was only one of us in working on gender and social issues. What we saw at that time is none of the funding proposals, per se, the logical frameworks, had any reference to gender, at a minimum, even gender sensitive indicators, leave alone, gender responsive or gender transformative indicators. So, but at the same time, you had the governing instrument which talked about mainstreaming gender across the program lifecycle. So the first step we took, or rather, I took, because at that time there was only 1 or 2 of us in that unit, is circle this back with the executive office, the front office, with the then Division of Mitigation and Adaptation, and through them with the executive board, particularly the co-chairs. At that time, we identified a champion who was then the UK co-chair, and we requested her to take this up more seriously in terms of not only it being a normative agenda, but something that needs to be a compliance. Because whereas you had environmental and social safeguards as a compliance tool, you never really, at the Green Climate Fund, we didn't have gender assessments and GESI action plans, if you like, as any compliance per se. So what happened is there's nothing that I personally reinvented. I actually took my lessons from my Asian Development Bank days when I used to work with them, where they had a very solid, strong gender strategy, or they still have. And when we were at the Asian Development Bank, we used to, for every proposal for infrastructure, non-infrastructure projects, whatever, we were actually supposed to, as a mandatory requirement, develop gender and social inclusion action plans. So I provided this best practice to the executive office and board members, saying, why don't we just replicate what ADB has done and see where we go from here? Because it's very important. If we are to say that women are disproportionately impacted by climate change and bear the burden of climate change as opposed to men, at least for the most part, then we have to walk the talk. Now, that is where the journey started in terms of developing not only gender assessments, which were already there in the first 5 proposals, but also as we moved forward with the gender and social inclusion action plan. So as a result, as GCF matured and Seble came into GCF, we had a big hit in terms of percentage of funding proposals, which have a not only a gender assessment, but a GESI action plan as well. The reason why we introduced it is because, like I said, we did not see many indicators happening in the logical frameworks. And so what we argued is this is not an additionality as such. This is more of trying to complement what is there in the funding proposal and strengthen the gender mainstreaming angle through high quality gender assessments and GESI action plans. So it's something I think GCF should be very proud of, because you are probably the only international organization in the world which has made it a compliant issue through the not only the gender assessments, but the GESI action plans as well. But most importantly, what you all have also done, leaving aside the challenges, is show the world or show the climate change space that you are taking gender very seriously. Now, the other point that I would like to put forward from the perspective of Save the Children is that, there is always a demand from GCF, and I think it's very important that it should be there, that we come up with high quality gender assessments and GESI action plans. And that is the reason why we have been working doubly hard at Save the Children to ensure at a minimum quality, if you like, in terms of these mandatory annexes. There's a reason to celebrate because GCF has made these annexes mandatory, and which is really a good thing. But more importantly, to look beyond, as Seble mentioned, numbers in context of trainings, capacity development programs, etc. It's much more than that. It's much more than just counting number of women who have been in farmer field schools, training on, sustainable farming practices. It's more about empowerment principles. It's more about meaningful, active participation. And it's more about, and I know that Seble is very strong on this, is about trying to see what are the risks you can mitigate in terms of, say, for example, gender-based violence, while taking into consideration the fact that there are social and cultural norms which actually hinder the progress of women and girls in different parts of the world and are highly contextual in nature. So, for example, in the Pacific SIDS, your gender-related issues will be quite different from what it is in Africa. So these are things which need to be teased out as you move along. And this is what we are learning at Save the Children as well. Of course, it's a journey. Like with any other thing in climate change and development, it's not really about ticking the boxes, including on gender mainstreaming. It's not about, saying we've done this and we've not done that. It's about telling the story, compelling storytelling in your evaluations, where you just don't talk about, looking at percentage point increase in X number of gender informed activities that have taken place, but complementing them with compelling stories, easy to comprehend, which will actually catch the attention of your board members and your constituencies, including UNFCCC and others. So that is what my experience from from GCF has been, and equally important, my experience from Save the Children has been till now. So again, the journey is still continuing. We are trying to define better processes, more impactful ways of addressing gender mainstreaming. But at the same time, we should understand that it is not a siloed approach. It needs to integrate and be embedded in a much more holistic perspective about how to tackle and combat socially exclusive issues and discriminatory norms and practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajib. I think when I and Susumu joined, of course, already the GCF gender assessments and the GAP, the gender action plans were in place. And so we didn't really appreciate all the effort that went into, to bring these as mandatory annexes when it comes to the accredited entities reporting to the GCF and so on. So it was really helpful. Thank you very much for your insights. So now I'm going to start the QA with the audience. So please, everyone, if you have any questions or comments to share with us, please feel free to raise your hand or even use the chat box to let us know what your questions are. So please feel free. Okay, so while waiting for people to kind of think about what to ask the speakers. So now I'm going to try to connect what Susumu has shared with some of the insights from Rajib and Seble. So very important to have, gender related learnings. And I do think there is the core indicator of, gender disaggregated data, how many people we reached, men and women. And that's not enough. So we do need to provide the qualitative data, right? If an accredited entity needs to report all the results and outcomes. So that's of course, that should be done. But even as evaluators, I think we've seen how challenging it is, how challenging it can be to kind of really collect both the quantitative and qualitative data and trying to really see the full picture, because we also face these time constraints when we go to the field, and see the countries, meet with the communities, people and the communities. So I think we also need to make that very conscious, intentional effort to be mindful of these gender inclusion aspects. So what can we do? I think Susumu mentioned, we usually rely on household data, for instance, but due to the varying cultural contexts, it's very difficult to talk to women separately, for instance. And in some cultures, I heard if the husband is not present with the wives when the interview is taking place, then you can't use whatever data that you may have gotten if you attempted to speak with the wife alone. The husband wouldn't allow us to use such data. So it's very difficult. Do you have any thoughts on that? So trying to connect, the evaluators' kind of struggles, challenges with the principles, GESI principles that we discussed. Seble?
Yeah, if I may, in the same way when we are saying we expect that there should be participatory approaches to gathering data, for doing the gender assessments, defining the kinds of actions that communities feel are important for them. I think monitoring and evaluation should also be using the same approach, a participatory approach to monitoring and evaluation. What it does is, in a way, address some of the challenges that we might have faced. What are the cultures? What are the cultural expectations? If you are engaging communities, then they will know how things should be done. So you wouldn't have to face some of the challenges. So you can already know how to approach a community. So for me, embedding our actions in community-based approaches. I mean, if we are going down to the communities, there are certain kinds of ways people behave, approach, and talk. Even, if you're sitting in a community of, you might be impressed by how many women and men have presented themselves in that meeting. But if you're not careful, you will see that only the men would be talking while the women are watching. Or, in certain communities, there are caste systems that allow certain community members to speak. So you can be all men and only a few would speak because that's the status within the community. So I think the lesson for us as outsiders going into a new community or into a community of that sort is to understand before we go, because we are asking communities to engage and understand. And in the same way, we should understand before we go to those places to understand what we should expect and prepare for it, so we can do, you were talking about time constraints and things like that, but maybe an early engagement with communities as to how it works. How would I be able to get the information that I need? What works well within this community might save us all the time and the money that we are afraid of spending on collecting gender-related data. But for me, I wouldn't say it would cost us more. What are the returns? I think is what should drive our work. What is it that we are trying to get? Because we have made investments to address gender equality issues, we have climate-related issues. If we don't learn enough, then we haven't done half the work. So I think that it's a worthwhile investment, and we shouldn't consider that additional resource required. We might not have the money. I think we should start with the notion that we will make sufficient finance available, because in the gender field, that is one of the biggest challenges, that there is never money enough to do the work that we need to do to address the gender issues that are identified. So I think it's educating ourselves before we go in might help us get the job done better.
Thank you for that. Rajib, you want to come in quickly?
No, very briefly. I mean, I was just going to say the same thing. And it's about how you approach your evaluation methodologies. I mean, I think the key thing over here, as Seble mentioned, is about participatory approaches. I mean, but there is another angle which I would like to mention, and this is what we were actually, talking to the board in 2017 when we did the first strategic planning and change management exercise, is do consider an approach which will provide GCF greater access to the field. Like, for example, a first level due diligence instead of second level due diligence. What happens is, if you are a standalone secretariat in Songdo, that is GCF, and you don't have footprints on the ground at the grassroots, there's so much you can actually gather in terms of information through intermediaries or accredited entities. It has, and again, I mean, you all will know much better than I have, because I've not been in GCF for more than 5 years now. We always face challenges in terms of understanding to what extent were gender equality principles, approaches, practices, being undertaken by accredited entities. there were just a few accredited entities who used to report on disaggregated data, and in some cases, beautifully so, qualitative measures. But there were a number of them who just didn't report anything. So it is, I think, a structural issue as well, apart from whatever Seblewongel has mentioned. It's a structural adjustment, which I think GCF should seriously consider in terms of going for first level due diligence, although it is not there in your governing instrument. But this is something we have actually voiced as the core team working on change management in 2017, is if you are to look at compliance on such important issues, including gender, environmental, and social safeguards, and looking at how these will benefit, excluded communities, then there is an opportunity that GCF should perhaps advocate with the board going forward in terms of trying to make your governing instrument a bit more fit for purpose, in the sense that you don't conduct only third-party evaluations or evaluations by IEU, but you continue to, across the project lifecycle, undertake process evaluations which are led through participatory approaches and with the support of communities. When you have communities providing that support, you will come up with a lot more stories to tell the world in terms of what you have achieved. So I'll leave it at that for now, but I think that is something that needs perhaps a wider argument or a discussion within GCF in terms of how would you try and monitor and evaluate projects through a first level due diligence channel rather than a second level due diligence channel. This has been a raging debate in GCF ever since I came to know about it, and the way we used to argue about it when we were there.
All right, thank you so much, Rajib. Yes, Susumu, but hold
Yeah.
on. I'm really hoping somebody from the audience would also feel free to, ask questions. I saw Chris kind of writing something. So Chris, if you have a question, please let us know. But let's Susumu first. Please react to what Rajib and Seblewongel said. Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, I agree with both Sebla and Rajib. It's not about methodologies or like approach that we are talking about here. And yeah, whenever possible, like we should be using like focus group discussions or community meetings or third party monitoring, right? And impact assessment is one kind of evaluation that we are conducting, right? And at the GCF or at IEU, impact assessment is not only for accountability purpose, but more strongly on the learning purpose that we use. And we follow the principle of the research because it's learning, so it's a research. So we cannot force the respondent to answer the question that they don't want to answer, right? So they can stop whenever they want, and they have right to refuse not to answer, and they can refuse to participate. So we hire these kind of like ethical consideration that we really take it seriously. But as Seble was saying, yeah, we should go beyond just counting numbers. We also, and then the board members and then the GCF Secretariat, we want to know like how the investment is changing the beneficiaries, right? Just not the number of like meetings or the trainings they participated. So we try to do better on this aspect, but yeah, it's again, it's not easy as a issue. Thanks.
Thank you. I did recognize some names that we don't see often. So I think these are the new colleagues that joined us. So thank you very much for joining us. I know we don't have a lot of time now, but I wanted to say Chris, Seung-hwan, Jihae, Chamaroon, and Michelle Andreas, thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. I'm gonna give you another chance before we close to raise a question or share with us anything, your thoughts, your reactions. So anyone who would like to come in? All right, it's a very quiet crowd.
Yeonji, if they
Yes,
don't,
go ahead.
they
Yeah,
can of course they can always like write to us and then we can get back to them,
of course,
after that.
yes. Yes, so as Susumu said, we are happy to hear from you. I'm going to leave our email addresses in the chat so you can reach out to the IEU. And also Seble, Rajib, if you want to do the same so that the audience, if they have any questions to follow up, they would like to, then they can send an email. All right, going once more, if anyone wants to come in. Okay, I think we can close, but thank you very much, everyone. I want to thank our panelists and Susumu, my fellow presenter, and everyone for coming and sharing with us your insights on gender inclusion and women's empowerment. I really hope that we can do a better, more systematic kind of job when it comes to this very important issue. Rajib is right. Women are disproportionately affected by climate change, and they have a very important role to play. So we cannot make this something subsidiary, but we have to make this a core requirement when it comes to climate projects and climate programming. So thank you very much. We hope to see you again in another IEU webinar in another setting. But with that, I'm going to close this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night, good morning, good
Thank
afternoon to
you.
all of
Thank
you.
you.
Okay. Bye.